I fancy myself a bit of dancing today.
With cannons?
It's not in our budget, I'm afraid.
Dang it.
Cannon Dancer, also known as Osman, a Mitchell arcade game from 1996. The corrupt world government's power over the human population is threatened by the goddess Slaver and her cult in the Persian Gulf. So the Federal Attorney General Jack Blazin summons the lone top-class assassin Kieran, or Osman as he's called in English, to destroy her and her temple. But once Kieran reaches the temple and fights off its leader Hario, Jack has Kieran incapacitated and sent off to die in the desert, no longer having any use for him. Kieran manages to escape, and he sets out to get his revenge on Jack and ultimately defeat Slaver on his own terms, even having to fight other members of his mercenary unit that want him dead. The story unfolds across 6 stages in various locations in Eurasia, as Kieran must kick, jump, climb, and slide his way to victory, tearing through his enemies like a knife through butter. Now this seems rather familiar, doesn't it? Using acrobatics and climbing to circumvent obstacles while fighting bad guys in a dystopian future? That sounds a lot like Capcom's Strider Hiryu, and it's no mere coincidence. The director and main designer of Strider, Koichi Yotsui, left Capcom for Mitchell Corporation, who you might know for the Buster Brothers games. And it was at Mitchell where he decided to do a spiritual sequel to Strider in the form of Cannon Dancer, or Osman as it would be called in English. This would be 3 years before Capcom would do an official Strider sequel for arcades in the Sony PlayStation, and Koichi would do another spiritual Strider sequel in the form of Moondiver in 2011. Cannon Dancer would retain the same basic controls of Strider, while adding and improving upon them. You can now control the movement of your jump a la Super Mario, and you can do a somersault attack in midair, kinda like Sonic the Hedgehog.
It's Mario and Sonic at the exact same time.
You're also able to use the jump button for grabbing certain enemies during a slide to throw them, and grabbing certain enemies in midair to slam into the ground. But the biggest advantage Kieran has is a screen-clearing bomb attack.
You know, I was wondering when you'd get to all the explosion stuff. You know, besides the bodies being ripped apart and erupting with blood.
Much like in many shoot-'em-up games, Kieran has a limited supply of fatal attacks to clear the screen of enemies and do extra damage on bosses. And as you'd expect, these bombs are extremely vital to quickly dealing with the more powerful adversaries, so be sure to save them for the bosses. Kieran can also acquire power-ups that let him have shadow clones a la Ninja Gaiden 2. These clones are good for strategically positioning so that you can attack enemies from a safe distance, and they look real cool.
Just like me, right? I'm cool.
Right, real cool!
One thing that might throw people off about Cannon Dancer is its sound design. Both the music and the sound effects are incredibly compressed and sometimes rather tinny.
Bit tinny?
But why would an arcade game from the mid-90s sound so crusty? It's quite simple, really. You ever played Street Fighter 2? Have you noticed how compressed all the sound effects and voice samples are? Try to imagine taking that same sound sample chip from the CPS-1, duplicating it, and having them handle all of your music and sound effects. That's precisely what Mitchell did with some of their games, including Cannon Dancer. It's important to keep in mind that a lot of arcade game developers didn't have the highest grade sound technology, or even the money for such tech like Capcom, Konami, Taito, Sega, or Namco.
Hey!
So, a good handful of them had to resort to older tech just to ensure that they turned a profit, even if it meant sacrificing sound fidelity. It's quite a shame in the case of Cannon Dancer, because the music itself, composed by Yusaku Aoki, is actually very good and fits the game's vibe perfectly. It'd be cool to hear a more high-quality rendition of the soundtrack, because it really deserves it. With its satisfying controls, enticing story, solid visuals, energizing music, and exciting stages, Cannon Dancer is quite special. It's truly a game that deserves to be talked about more often in the same breath as more well-known arcade classics. The game is on the shorter side, even for an arcade game of this era, but it's an experience that's worthy of your time, even if you just want to try the game out once or twice.
And if there's one thing we can all learn from Cannon Dancer, is to take up arms against fascists.
I mean, pretty much.